The annals of American medical history hold few case studies as chilling as that of Timothy Caldwell. In the summer of 1867, this 8-year-old boy, living in a quiet farming community near Sedalia, Missouri, became the focus of an investigation that would defy all understanding of the human mind. The region's sole physician, a man named Dr. Samuel Harding, would go on to fill 3 entire leather-bound volumes with his observations of a child whose actions seemed to contradict the very essence of childhood. To a stranger, Timothy appeared to be a perfectly normal, even pleasant little boy. But that innocent facade concealed a chilling depth that the science of the 19th century was utterly unprepared to confront. Over a 6-month period, a shadow fell over the community. 3 local people died in what were officially ruled as accidents, while on surrounding farms, dozens of animals were discovered lifeless under bizarre circumstances. In total, 11 people had their lives tragically cut short after crossing paths with this quiet boy, whose haunting pale blue eyes never seemed to share in his smile. For more than a century, the official case files were locked away, sealed by local officials. But the story of Timothy Caldwell, once unearthed, reveals a darkness that forces us to question everything we believe about the capacity for evil, even in the very young. Before we delve deeper into the terror that seized Sedalia County, if this kind of dark history grabs your attention, please consider subscribing to our channel. Make sure to hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our explorations into America's most unsettling historical mysteries. And we'd love for you to drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. We truly value connecting with our worldwide community of mystery lovers. The saga that would cement Timothy Caldwell's name in fame didn't start with an act of violence, but with a profound sense of loss. The Missouri of 1867 was a land scarred by conflict, still healing from the deep wounds of the Civil War. Small towns like Sedalia had seen their finest young men march off to war, many never to return, leaving a legacy of widows, orphans, and fractured communities struggling to piece themselves back together. 15 miles south of town, nestled in a quiet valley, was the Caldwell Farm. It had once been a thriving homestead, built by James and Martha Caldwell, who dreamed of a future raising cattle and corn. But those aspirations were buried with James at the Battle of Wilson's Creek in 1861. Martha fought to keep the farm running on her own, but the harsh winter of 1865 claimed her as consumption ravaged her lungs. Their son Thomas, just 21 years old, was left with land he couldn't manage and debts he couldn't settle. Then, word arrived that his brother William had perished in the notorious Andersonville prison camp. William left behind a widow and an 8-year-old son named Timothy. For Thomas, this news was both a burden and a potential solution. The boy would need a home, and Thomas desperately needed another pair of hands for the never-ending farm work. Thomas Caldwell was a stern man, his temperament hardened by the brutalities of war and the bitterness of personal loss. His wife, Sarah, had grown cynical and sharp-tongued over the course of their childless marriage. Neither of them was truly equipped to raise a child, especially not the one who appeared on their doorstep in the spring of 1866. He carried nothing more than a single cloth sack, his gaze unsettlingly mature for his years. Timothy Caldwell was a small child for his age, with fair skin that blistered under the Missouri sun, and blonde hair that his Aunt Sarah kept cropped short to ward off lice. He was quiet about his past, offering only scattered details when asked. His father was a soldier. His mother coughed up blood. He'd stayed with neighbors after she passed. What was most remarkable to the adults around him was Timothy's impeccable politeness. He was a boy of yes, sir, and yes, ma'am, who never once protested his chores or any punishment he received. By all outward appearances, he was the very picture of a well-mannered child. Dr. Samuel Harding's first meeting with Timothy was in June of 1866. The boy had come to town with his uncle for supplies. Harding, a graduate of the Missouri Medical College, was one of the few formally educated doctors west of St. Louis. His years tending to soldiers from both sides of the war had given him a sharp ability to read people. He felt an immediate sense of unease around the Caldwell boy, though he couldn't pinpoint why. The child was perfectly deferential, Harding later documented in his journal. He responded to my questions without hesitation, held my gaze appropriately, and showed none of the nervous fidgeting I'd come to expect from country children meeting a stranger. And yet, I felt a profound disquiet in his presence. His stare was so intense, it was as if he were examining me with the same clinical curiosity I usually reserve for my own patients. The farming community near Sedalia was a tight-knit place where secrets were hard to keep. While the Caldwell farm was remote, it wasn't completely cut off from watchful eyes. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, their direct neighbour, often saw Timothy out in the fields or looking after the animals. She commented to her husband on the boy's strange, relentless work ethic. He never seemed to get tired, and he never took a moment to play or rest, the way any normal child would. "It's like watching a small automaton," she told her husband Samuel one evening. "He works from dawn till dusk, a steady, uncomplaining pace. It just isn't natural for a boy to have no playfulness in him." The Pattersons raised chickens, and Eleanor began to note it, see a strange pattern. Her birds would become frantic whenever Timothy was near the fence line dividing their properties. They'd huddle together, squawking in alarm, refusing to go anywhere near the boundary. Her husband wrote it off as nothing, but Eleanor had a persistent, nagging feeling that the animals could sense something about the boy that the people couldn't. The first death happened on a blistering hot day in August 1866. 5-year-old Mary Fletcher, the blacksmith's daughter, was a bright, cheerful girl known for her infectious laugh and her habit of wandering off. She'd been playing down by Willow Creek, a shallow stream that meandered through several properties, including the Caldwell farm. It was Timothy who found her body. He walked up to the Fletcher house just as the family was sitting down for supper. His clothes were damp, and his face was etched with what seemed to be sincere shock. "Mrs. Fletcher," he said, his voice surprisingly firm, "I found Mary down by the creek. She isn't breathing." When the frantic search party reached the stream, they found little Mary Fletcher face down in water that was barely 18 inches deep. Dr. Harding was called at once. He concluded that the girl had drowned, a heartbreaking but sadly common type of accident in rural communities where children often played without supervision near water. But it wasn't the death itself that bothered Harding. It was Timothy's testimony. The boy gave an incredibly precise description of where Mary was, the exact position of her body, and the state of her dress. When asked why he was in that specific location, Timothy explained he'd been searching for a lost calf. The boy's memory was extraordinarily vivid, Harding wrote. He could recount the precise angle of the deceased child's limbs, how her dress was snagged on a branch beneath the water, and even the tint of the water and her face. Such a level of detail seemed highly unusual for a child who claimed to be so terrified by the Thomas Caldwell backed up the story, confirming a calf had gone missing that morning and that he'd sent Timothy to look for it along the creek. 2 days later, the calf was found, perfectly fine, grazing in a pasture almost a mile away from where Mary had died. The Fletcher family, consumed by grief, was grateful for Timothy's actions. He was the one who found their daughter, after all. At the funeral, Timothy sat beside his aunt and uncle, his head bowed in a show of respect. When the family expressed their thanks, he accepted it with a quiet solemnity. "I only wish I could have found her sooner," he told Mary's heartbroken father, his voice laced with the perfect amount of sorrow. But Eleanor Patterson, observing from her pew across the church, saw something that would trouble her for weeks. As Mary Fletcher's mother collapsed in a fit of grief, as grown men wept at the sight of the tiny coffin, Timothy Caldwell's expression remained a perfect, placid mask. His head was bowed, but when he glanced up thinking no one was watching, his pale blue eyes were dry, alert and watchful, absorbing every detail of the sorrow around him. The second death followed just 3 weeks later. An elderly Norwegian immigrant named Henrik Larsen, who had worked as a logger until arthritis crippled him, was found at the base of a rocky ledge known as Devil's Bluff. The bluff happened to overlook the very same creek where Mary Fletcher had drowned. Henrik was known to climb it to tend to the wild beehives he kept there. And once again, Timothy Caldwell was at the center of the discovery. He claimed he was on his way home from town when he saw something odd at the bottom of the bluff. "I saw Mr. Larson's hat stuck on a thorn bush," Timothy explained to the crowd that gathered. "I called his name, but he didn't answer, so I climbed down to see." Henrik Larson was dead. His neck had been and broken in what looked like a fall from the 40-foot cliff. Dr. Harding's examination suggested he died on impact. The only strange detail was the number of dead bees scattered around the body, far more than one would expect to find away from a hive. "Mr. Larson knew every inch of those bluffs," Samuel Patterson remarked to Dr. Harding. "He'd been climbing them for years without so much as a misstep. It makes no sense that he'd just fall now." Timothy offered a theory. Perhaps the old man had been stung and lost his balance. "He was always saying how angry the bees get if you bother them," the boy said. "Maybe a swarm came after him and he got disoriented." Dr. Harding considered the explanation plausible, but the scene was still wrong. The dead bees were all concentrated in a small circle right around Henrik's body. If he'd disturbed a hive at the top of the bluff, there should have been evidence of bees all along his fall. Instead, it was as if the bees had been dropped right there at the impact site. When Harding later climbed the bluff himself, he found the hives completely undisturbed, the bees buzzing peacefully. The third death erased any notion of coincidence. In September 1866, a 6-year-old boy named Jacob Mills disappeared while playing in the woods near his family's home. His body was discovered 4 days later at the bottom of an abandoned well nearly half a mile from where he was last seen. Timothy Caldwell had been among the first to volunteer for the search party. For 3 long days, he searched tirelessly alongside the men, demonstrating a stamina that was shocking for a boy his age. He navigated the woods with an expert's knowledge, leading the searchers through dense thickets that even locals found confusing. When someone asked how he knew the area so well, Timothy said he often explored the woods in his spare time, looking for medicinal herbs for his aunt. On the morning of the 4th day, Timothy appeared at the Mills cabin. "I think I found something," he told Jacob's father, his voice thick with apparent exhaustion. "There's an old well about half a mile north. I thought I heard crying." The well was masterfully hidden, obscured by a tangle of fallen logs and overgrown weeds. Jacob Mills was at the bottom, alive, but just barely. He was suffering from severe dehydration and exposure. Dr. Harding was called, but the little boy passed away just hours after being rescued, his body too weak to recover. The child had been trapped in that well for nearly 4 days, Harding wrote in his journal. The fact that Timothy Caldwell located him in such a hidden spot raises serious questions. Just how well does this boy know the local terrain, and what other hidden dangers is he aware of? Even more disturbing was Timothy's conduct during Jacob's last hours. As the Mills family wept around their dying son, Timothy sat in a corner of the room, seemingly lost in prayer. But Dr. Harding, watching from an angle where he wouldn't be seen, noticed the truth. Timothy wasn't praying. His lips moved, but his eyes were locked on Jacob Mills with a gaze of intense, scientific focus. He appeared to be documenting every detail of the boy's decline, the shallow breaths, the pale skin, the flickering consciousness. When Jacob finally took his last breath, Timothy's face showed no sadness or shock. Instead, Dr. Harding saw something he could only describe as a look of profound, almost academic satisfaction. Later, Dr. Harding made an excuse to go back to the abandoned well. The site itself felt wrong. It was so well hidden, covered in debris that would have required real effort to move. Timothy's claim of hearing a cry from deep inside seemed impossible. As Harding looked closer, he saw what the rescue party had missed. The logs and branches around the well's opening weren't random. They had been deliberately placed, arranged to create a nearly perfect natural camouflage that you would never notice unless you already knew it was there. The implication was horrifying. Jacob Mills hadn't just fallen into that well. Someone had put him there, and that someone had hidden the spot. waiting until the boy was beyond the point of survival. That night, Dr. Harding began his detailed journals on Timothy Caldwell. If his terrifying suspicions were true, this child was a threat to the entire community. But he had no proof, only a growing collection of horrifying coincidences. The problem was that, on the surface, Timothy was a perfect child. He went to church, recited his prayers, worked harder than most men, and was always respectful to his elders. Most critically, Timothy always had a logical reason for being at the scene of each tragedy. He was searching for a lost calf when he found Mary. He was walking home when he saw Henrik's hat. He was a concerned community member helping to search for Jacob. But Harding's experience as a war doctor had taught him to see past the surface. He had treated men who killed not for duty or in self-defense, but because of a fundamental darkness within them. He recognized the signs: a chilling detachment from emotion, too little reaction to horrific events, and an unnerving ability to speak of violence with cold, clinical precision. Timothy Caldwell had all these traits, packaged within the innocent body of an 8-year-old boy. Dr. Harding's private investigation started in October 1866. He used his position as the local doctor to make rounds to farms all over the county, pretending to check on families recovering from the war. In reality, he was asking questions about Timothy Caldwell. What he learned painted a grim picture of a boy at the center of a spreading circle of misfoe. Cartoon. Livestock on nearby farms were dying at an alarming rate. These weren't deaths from sickness. They were strange, violent accidents. Chickens were found with their necks snapped, supposedly by foxes that left no other trace. Pigs developed mysterious injuries that festered. Healthy horses would suddenly go lame and have to be put down. Eleanor Patterson told Dr. Harding she'd lost 17 chickens in 2 months. "It's the oddest thing," she said. "1 or 2 at a time, always in the morning, their necks broken so cleanly. My husband blames foxes, but there are no fox tracks near the coop. And the way they're killed, it's too precise." When Harding examined the dead birds, he agreed. Their necks had been broken with a specific targeted force that suggested a knowledge of anatomy. It wasn't the messy work of a predator, it was deliberate and controlled. The same pattern appeared on other farms. A farmer named James Wickham had lost 3 calves in what he called freak accidents. Animals strangling themselves on ropes or getting their heads stuck in fences in ways that made no sense. In every single case, the farms were close to the Caldwell property. And often, neighbors recalled seeing Timothy nearby right around the time of the incident. "I saw him walking our fence line the morning we found the calf," James Wickham told the doctor. "I thought it was strange him being so far from home, but he was always so polite, just waved and said hello." Harding also began observing Timothy during his medical visits to the Caldwell home. The boy was always there, a silent observer, as the doctor tended to his aunt and uncle. But Timothy watched with a disturbing curiosity, asking questions about medicine and anatomy far beyond his years. "How can you tell if someone is truly dead?" Timothy asked him once, his tone as casual as if he were asking about the weather. "Some to it? Mez, they just look like they're asleep." When asked why he was curious, Timothy had a ready answer. "Uncle Thomas says I need to know what to do in an emergency, since we live so far from town." The explanation was perfectly reasonable, but the question itself unsettled Dr. Harding. There was a cold, clinical quality to the boy's interest in death that was far from normal childhood curiosity. He wanted to know about the mechanics of dying, the signs, the time it took, and survival rates for different injuries, all with the detached interest of a medical student examining a corpse. Harding started testing him, feeding Timothy false medical information. He'd claim certain injuries were always fatal, or that specific symptoms meant one thing when they meant another. Timothy never corrected him, but Harding saw that the boy was absorbing and retaining every single piece of information. Even more unsettling was how Timothy reacted to Dr. Harding's stories about treating soldiers during the war. Most children would be horrified. Timothy listened with rapt attention, asking for graphic details about wound patterns, blood loss, and the sounds men made in agony. "Did they scream a lot when you had to cut off their arms?" he asked once, his pale blue eyes locked on Harding's. "Or were they in too much pain to make any noise?" The question, delivered in Timothy's usual polite tone, sent a shiver down the doctor's spine. By November of 1866, Dr. Harding had filled 2 journals with his observations. The evidence pointed to a child who possessed a deep adult understanding of violence, coupled with a complete and terrifying lack of human empathy. But notes in a journal weren't proof. He needed something concrete if he was going to protect the community from the predator living in its midst. His chance came when Thomas Caldwell hurt his back during the harvest. The injury put him on bed rest and required daily visits from Dr. Harding, giving the doctor unprecedented access to the home. During these visits, he engaged Timothy in long, probing conversations, trying to map the depths of the boy's mind. What he found was worse than he could have ever imagined. Timothy Caldwell had been conducting experiments. For months, perhaps even years, he had been systematically capturing, torturing, and killing small animals to study their reactions to pain and injury. The boy had once mentioned a small cave where he liked to go to be alone. When Dr. Harding finally investigated the location, he found a horrifying scene. A meticulously organized collection of animal skeletons, crude surgical tools made from sharpened farm implements, and a stack of detailed drawings that served as a laboratory journal of torture and mutilation. The drawings were the most damning evidence. Rendered with a skill that was shocking for a child, they depicted rabbits, squirrels, and other animals in various states of injury and dissection. Each image was accompanied by neat, handwritten notes detailing the animal's response, how long it took to die, and which methods seemed to cause the most suffering. One note, next to a drawing of a rabbit, read, "Subject remained conscious for approximately 10 minutes after removal of eyes. Vocalizations decreased in intensity. Movement ceased after sustained pressure was applied to the throat." Dr. Harding finally understood. The accidents on the neighboring farms were not random. They were Timothy's way of escalating his experiments to larger and more complex subjects. But the most chilling discovery was a new series of drawings. These weren't of animals. They were sketches of human figures, children and adults, in poses of agony and death. Each obo, nay, was surrounded by speculative notes on human anatomy and how to inflict maximum harm. One drawing was unmistakably Mary Fletcher. Another showed Henrik Larsson falling from the bluff. A third depicted Jacob Mills at the bottom of the well, with detailed notes on the physiological effects of dehydration and exposure. Timothy Caldwell hadn't just been a witness to these tragedies. He had been the architect. He had planned them, executed them with chilling precision, and documented his results. And as Dr. Harding was about to learn, the horror in Sedalia County was only just beginning. If this story is sending shivers down your spine, please share this video with a friend who appreciates a truly dark mystery. And be sure to hit that like button to help support our channel. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss stories like this one. Now, let's find out what happened next. Dr. Harding was in an impossible position. The evidence in the cave was undeniable proof that Timothy was a killer, but it had been gathered through an illegal search. Worse, the very idea of an 8-year-old serial murderer was so alien to the 19th century worldview that no one would ever believe it. The medical community of 1867 had no concept of psychopathy or antisocial personality disorder. The prevailing view was that children were born innocent, and any corruption was the result of a bad environment. The thought that a child could be born without a conscience was simply unimaginable. Harding knew if he took his findings to the authorities, they would think he was losing his mind, perhaps driven mad by his wartime experiences. They would explain away the evidence, defend Timothy as a traumatized orphan, and the killings would continue. So, he chose a different path. Dr. Harding decided to confront Timothy himself. On his next visit to the farm, he asked the boy to accompany him on a walk to check the livestock. Once they were far from the house, Harding told Timothy exactly what he had found in the cave. The boy's reaction was not at all what Harding expected. There was no denial, no fear, no surprise at being discovered. He just listened with a calm, neutral expression as the doctor described the drawings and the gruesome notes, nodding slightly as if to confirm the accuracy of the report. "You're not going to tell anyone," Timothy said when the doctor was finished. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of absolute certainty. "And why wouldn't I?" Harding asked, baffled by the boy's confidence. Timothy smiled. It was the first truly genuine expression Dr. Harding had ever seen on his face, and it was terrifying. "Because no one would believe you," he said, "and because you're too curious to see what I do next." The boy was right on both points. Harding knew his story would sound like madness, but Timothy had also exposed a truth the doctor was hesitant to admit even to himself. He was scientifically fascinated by this boy, this anomaly, this perfect specimen of human darkness. "How long have you been doing this?" Dr. Harding asked. "Since I was 5, Timothy answered, as if discussing the weather. "Maybe younger. I began with insects, then moved to mice, and then to bigger things. It's fascinating to see how different creatures respond to the same stimuli. And the people who died?" Timothy just shrugged. "They were experiments too. I wanted to know if humans would react the same way animals do. For the most part, they do. But they have a better understanding of what's happening to them, which makes it far more interesting." A cold dread washed over Dr. Harding. "What are you planning to do next?" Timothy paused, giving the question serious thought. "I need to learn what happens when you hurt someone who trusts you. Someone who has no reason to suspect anything is wrong, right up until the very end." The meaning was unmistakable. Timothy was going to kill his aunt and uncle. Dr. Harding knew he had to act fast. Timothy had revealed his plans with the chilling confidence of someone who felt he was untouchable. That evening, Harding went to see Sheriff William Crawford in Sedalia. Crawford was a pragmatic man, a decorated Union Army veteran with no time for wild theories. But he respected Dr. Harding and was willing to listen. Harding laid out his case methodically, sticking to the facts. He presented the drawings from the cave, he outlined the pattern of deaths that all revolved around Timothy, and he shared the boy's advanced knowledge of violence. But the final piece of evidence was the most critical: Timothy's direct threat against his aunt and uncle. "Even if only half of what you're telling me is true," Sheriff Crawford said, his face grim as he examined the horrific sketches, "we have a serious problem. We can't arrest a child based on drawings and suspicion, but we can watch him, and we can be there if he makes a move." The two men, along with Crawford's most trusted deputies, devised a plan. Dr. Harding would go to the Caldwell farm for his usual morning visit. He would bring a strong dose of laudanum, supposedly for Thomas's back pain, but actually to sedate both Thomas and Sarah, making them less vulnerable. Meanwhile, the sheriff and his men would hide around the property, read, to intervene at a moment's notice. The plan went into motion the next morning. As Dr. Harding's buggy pulled up to the farmhouse, he immediately knew something was wrong. The air was still. The usual sounds of a working farm, the chickens, the pigs, were gone. The property was shrouded in an eerie silence. Timothy was standing in the doorway, waiting for him. The boy was perfectly still, his pale blue eyes tracking the doctor's every move like a predator. He was wearing his work clothes, but his sleeves were rolled up, and his hands looked like they'd been scrubbed clean, as if in preparation for a messy task. "Good morning, Dr. Harding," Timothy said, his voice polite as always, but now with a new undercurrent of excitement. "I've been waiting for you." Those words chilled Harding to the bone. Waiting. The boy had been expecting him, perhaps even counting on his arrival as part of his plan. Inside, Thomas and Sarah Caldwell were in their bed, seemingly fast asleep. But as Harding approached, he saw that Thomas's breathing was far too shallow, his skin a deathly pale color. "What did you give them?" Harding asked, his voice low, not daring to take his eyes off the couple. "Just some herbs I found in the woods," Timothy replied from behind him. "It's amazing what grows out here. Some plants have very useful properties." Harding checked their pulses. They were weak, but steady. They were deeply unconscious, but alive. Timothy had been precise with the dosage. He wanted them helpless, but conscious enough for whatever he had planned. "They won't be waking up for a few hours," Timothy said conversationally. "That should give us plenty of time to talk." What followed was the most horrifying conversation of Dr. Harding's life. Timothy spoke of murder and torture with the detached air of a professor giving a lecture. He detailed his experiments, explaining his methods and his findings from each death. "Mary Fletcher taught me that drowning is a slow process," Timothy said, settling into a chair. "People think it's quick, but it's not. There's a period of struggle, of panic, and a very interesting pattern of breathing attempts before the body finally gives up. I had to hold her head under the water for nearly 3 minutes before she stopped fighting." Dr. Harding felt his blood run cold. "You held her under?" Timothy nodded eagerly. "I told her I'd found a pretty rock at the bottom of the creek. When she bent over to look, I just pushed her head down. She fought much harder than I anticipated. That's when I learned that humans have a much stronger will to survive than animals." "And Henrik Larsson?" "That was more complex," Timothy admitted. "I couldn't overpower him, so I had to be clever. I knew he checked his hives every Thursday. So the night before I went up and loosened the stones along the edge of the bluff. Then I captured a bag full of his own bees." His eyes lit up at the memory. "When he climbed up, I was hiding. I threw the bag of bees in his face and started yelling that he was being swarmed. He panicked and stumbled right over the edge I had prepared. The fall killed him instantly, just as I calculated." "And Jacob Mills?" "Jacob," Timothy said, a teacher sharing his favorite lesson, "was the most informative. I didn't want to kill him quickly. I wanted to observe a slow decline over several days. I told him I'd found a nest of baby raccoons to lure him into the woods." He paused, savoring the memory. "I helped him climb down into the well, then I covered the opening. I visited him every day, giving him just enough water to prolong his life, but not enough for him to regain any strength." Dr. Harding now understood that Timothy's plans for his aunt and uncle were not just hypothetical. "What are you going to do to them?" he asked. Timothy's genuine, chilling smile returned. "That, Dr. Harding, is where you come in. You see, all my other experiments were on subjects who didn't understand what was happening. But you know exactly what I am. That makes you the perfect subject for a new kind of study." As he spoke, Timothy began to gather items from around the room. Rope, a heavy candlestick, sharp knives from the kitchen. He arranged them neatly, like a surgeon preparing his tools. "I want to see what a person does when they know they are going to die, but they also have to protect people they care about," Timothy explained, his excitement growing. "Will you sacrifice yourself for them? Will you fight me? Or will you run and save yourself?" The time for talk was over. Dr. Harding pulled a pistol from his medical bag. "Step away from the knives, Timothy," he ordered, his voice unwavering. Timothy eyed the pistol with academic interest. "A Navy Colt. 6 shots, I believe. And how many people are in this house? My aunt, my uncle, you, and the 3 men hiding outside. That's 6. So even if you shoot me, you're out of ammunition." He moved closer, his voice becoming almost hypnotic. "You want to know what made me this way. You want to know if I was born like this. You want to know if there are others like me." He was identifying and exploiting the doctor's own scientific curiosity, a terrifying display of psychological manipulation. The final confrontation happened as Timothy moved toward his uncle with a rope. Harding lunged, but the boy was shockingly fast, slashing at the doctor's arm with a hidden knife. The struggle was short but brutal. Timothy was smaller, but he fought with the ferocity of a wild animal and the precision of a student of anatomy. Harding managed to disarm him, but Timothy immediately produced another blade. The house was filled with his preparations. The sounds of the fight finally brought the sheriff and his deputies bursting through the door. They found Dr. Harding wrestling with the boy, while Thomas and Sarah lay motionless on the bed. A deputy quickly restrained Timothy. In the aftermath, Timothy Caldwell sat quietly in the corner, his clothes torn, his face bruised, but his pale blue eyes still burned with that same cold, calculating intelligence. "You can't prove a thing," he said, as the deputies tied his hands. "No one will ever believe a child could do all of this." Sheriff Crawford looked down at the boy, a mix of revulsion and awe on his face. "Maybe not," he said, "but trying to murder your family in front of 3 lawmen, that's more than enough to see you locked away for a very long time." Timothy smiled that same genuine, horrifying smile. "You won't hang me," he said with utter certainty. "I'm too young, and I'm far too interesting. Someone will want to study me." Just when it seemed the nightmare was over, the true horror of Sedalia County was only beginning to unfold. If this story is captivating you, share it with a friend who loves a dark historical mystery. Hit that like button and please subscribe so you never miss another story. Let's discover what happened next. But he was right about the difficulty of proving his past crimes. When Sheriff Crawford tried to present the evidence from the cave, he met the exact wall of disbelief Dr. Harding had predicted. The drawings were dismissed as the fantasies of a disturbed, traumatized child. The string of deaths was chalked up to a tragic series of coincidences. But the attempted murder of his aunt and uncle was another matter. 3 officers of the law had witnessed it. Even the most sympathetic mind couldn't explain away an 8-year-old boy attacking his family with a knife. The legal system of 1867 was completely unprepared for a case like this. Timothy was too young to be tried as an adult, but far too dangerous for an orphanage. The case became a legal and medical sensation, drawing experts from across the country. Finally, a compromise was reached. Timothy would be committed to the Missouri State Hospital for the Insane in Fulton. There, he would be studied by the nation's leading alienists, the 19th century equivalent of psychiatrists. Dr. Samuel Harding accompanied Timothy to the hospital, staying for 3 months to document the boy's behavior. His work on the case would become one of the earliest systematic studies of what we now call psychopathy in a child, though his findings wouldn't be published for decades. Timothy took to life in the hospital with the same chilling intelligence he'd shown on the farm. He quickly learned how to fake emotions, convincing many of the staff that he was making a miraculous recovery. He could produce convincing tears, express what seemed to be genuine remorse, and show gratitude for his treatment. But Dr. Harding saw the truth. Timothy was just studying his new environment, learning how to manipulate people more effectively. He was building a catalogue of human emotions, which he could replicate perfectly without feeling any of them. The subject demonstrates extraordinary cognitive function, paired with a complete void of authentic emotional response, Harding wrote. He has learned to simulate normal human reactions so skillfully that he can deceive most observers. He understands sadness as the face people make when they want help, but he has never felt sadness himself. Harding's sessions also revealed the true scope of Timothy's violent imagination. Once the boy thought he had earned the doctor's trust, he began to share his ideas for new experiments, scenarios of psychological and physical torture that made his past crimes look like child's play. The hospital records show that Timothy remained at the facility for 18 months. During that time, a series of strange incidents occurred. Several patients died unexpectedly from what appeared to be accidents or natural causes, but a closer look revealed signs of careful planning. 3 elderly patients suffered fatal heart attacks shortly after spending time with Timothy. 2 younger patients had serious falls in areas where Timothy had been seen lurking. Patients began to report that Timothy would visit their rooms at night, standing silently by their beds, just watching them sleep. Dr. Martha Fitzgerald, an expert brought in to consult on the case, discovered Timothy was keeping a secret journal. He had convinced a nurse to give him paper and a pencil for therapeutic writing. The journal was filled with what appeared to be the innocent, remorseful thoughts of a troubled child. But Dr. Fitzgerald trained in European cryptography, suspected there was more to it. When she applied analytical techniques to the text, she uncovered a sophisticated cipher. The decoded messages revealed Timothy's true mind. He wasn't recovering. He was conducting a systematic analysis of the hospital, its staff, and its security. His goal wasn't just to escape. It was to use his confinement to perfect his methods of manipulation and murder. One decoded entry read, Day 47. Dr. F is convinced my tears today were genuine. Her response patterns show increased sympathy. I estimate 3 more weeks of this performance will establish enough trust to allow for physical contact during our sessions. The discovery of the coded journal led to a massive security increase. But in the summer of 1868, Timothy Caldwell vanished from the hospital. The official report concluded he had simply escaped during a transfer between buildings. But Dr. Harding knew better. He believed Timothy had spent his entire confinement meticulously planning his escape, subtly manipulating guards and staff for months, exploiting dozens of tiny rule changes until he had created his own perfect opportunity. His escape wasn't an act of desperation, Harding wrote. It was the culmination of a masterpiece of psychological warfare. For the rest of his life, Dr. Harding tracked reports of suspicious deaths across the Midwest, looking for Timothy's signature, staged accidents, evidence of animal torture, and the presence of a helpful, unnaturally mature child. But Timothy would be older now, stronger, and far more skilled at covering his tracks. His time in the hospital had turned him into something even more dangerous. The Caldwell farm was abandoned. The cave was sealed. Dr. Harding's journals were eventually donated to the Missouri Historical Society, where they remain to this day. In his final journal entry, written just before his death in 1891, Dr. Harding wrote, I have spent 24 years trying to understand what Timothy Caldwell was. I now fear he was not an aberration. He was a glimpse of what a human can become when stripped of all morality. If he survived, then somewhere in America, there is a man who understands the human mind better than any doctor, who can manipulate anyone, and who sees all of humanity as nothing more than subjects for his experiments. This chilling story shows us that evil can hide behind the most innocent of faces. The case of Timothy Caldwell forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about human nature, and to consider the terrifying possibility that some people are simply born without a soul. What do you think happened to Timothy Caldwell? Do you believe he continued his horrifying experiments for the rest of his life? Leave your theories in the comments below. If you found this story as unsettling and fascinating as we did, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share it with someone who loves a mystery that is as dark and complex as they come. Remember, sometimes the truth is far more terrifying than any work of fiction. We'll see you in the next video.